We're here today on realagriculture.com with Glen Hodgson. He's with the Conference Board of Canada. Welcome today, Glen.
Thank you very much.
Glen, there's been a lot of discussions today at the International Livestock Congress about the economy. As in the beef industry, you know, we do have a product where we do rely on a reasonably good economy for people to buy the product. From a Canadian perspective, how is our economy doing, and can we throw away the word recession at this point?
Well, I was going to start there, Sean, so thank you for that. I think we should throw aside the word recession. We've actually seen growth in Canada for most of the last year now, same as in the United States. The key difference between the two economies is that we're having job creation in Canada, which is fairly robust. Our unemployment rate has fallen from 9.5% to below 8%. It's back up to 8%, but we're seeing month-over-month jobs being created. In the U.S., they don't have that yet. You have an output recovery, where business is recovering, but there are no jobs yet. And that's adding to a real attitude of sort of fear and uncertainty in the American population, really around the world. You know, every time we make some progress and things start to stabilize, we have another little crisis go off. First it was Greece, and it took a few months to get the Greek tragedy out of our system and things have stabilized. Now people are worried about deflation, a falling overall price level in the United States. But for the most part, the economy's recovering. We have, I said this morning, we have too much government, not enough private sector activity yet. So we don't really have robust either consumption or private investment yet. But we're heading the right direction as long as we don't allow the fear factor to overtake our rational behavior.
A year ago, when we chatted, you talked about you used a term, I can't remember what it was, but you said there'd be a slow recovery.
Yeah.
You still feel that way?
Well, it's not negative. It's not the kind of spectacular bounce back that usually happens after a recession. So it's kind of slow and steady, but with a lot of bumps. 3% growth in the U.S. this year, 3.5% in Canada, pretty good numbers. But normally what happens after a recession is you have a period where the economy grows at 4 to 6% for at least 2 quarters, maybe longer. And we're not having that this time because the imbalances were so big. There's so much deleveraging required by U.S. consumers in particular. So yeah, I think we're still looking at that kind of steady return to growth, but nothing really spectacular either.
A lot of Canadian farms obviously have debt. Interest rates are a big topic. What is your outlook on interest rates?
Well, we're in a rising rate environment now in Canada. The Bank of Canada has already increased rates by 25 basis points, twice. We think that short rates will probably be between, say, 1.5% and 1.75% by year end, and then keep rising. Because unlike the U.S., where they're worried about deflation, we actually have inflation in Canada, kind of near where it should be. It's between sort of 1.75% to 2%, which is what our target is. And if that's the case, if you have growth returning and rising inflation, then you've got to have interest rates returning to a more normal state. So our forecast is the rates will be something like 4% at the short end by the end of 2011. And it's all a question of how quickly the Bank of Canada gets there. I don't think we're going to see any big steps because there's a lot of uncertainty, but the bank understands that it needs to have an increasing rate environment to keep inflation under control for Canada.
So if the U.S. is worried about deflation, and we're having to raise rates because we're trying to have moderate, slow growth, that means the Canadian dollar is going up.
It means the Canadian dollar is going up. The U.S. dollar should be weakening against most other currencies for its own reasons. They have a huge trade deficit still, and the dollar really becomes the swing variable that can bring about adjustment absent anything else. But you're right, the United States is going to have to export its way out of this problem, which means they'll want to rely on a little bit weaker U.S. dollar going forward, and that puts pressure on us. And therefore, our view that I expressed this morning is that our dollar will be around par for a long time to come, maybe even break through second half of this year as interest rates rise. So the dollar could be something like $1.02 against the U.S. dollar by year end.
Wow.
And that's a tough environment for farmers of all types, because it means that for every dollar sold to the U.S., you're getting less revenue back. But it also means it's a chance to import stuff at a lower price. And it's part of adapting to a world where commodity prices have recovered, and where we have a petrocurrency very much driven by global oil prices, and there's not much we can do about that except adapt, frankly.
Right. But it's still challenging.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Very challenging. When you put on top of that rising interest rates and rising real wages, because we've got a tightening labor market, it makes for a very challenging overall circumstance for farmers. And you know, adaptation, adjustment, innovation, those are all the kind of words we're going to use in Canada going forward as our economy adapts to this new reality.
So it seems by the discussion here, we seem to have somewhat of a separation between the Canadian economic situation and the U.S.
Yep.
Is this just sort of a temporary thing, or because I've always grown up with it seems like we just sort of follow them. They raise rates, we raise. They lower, we lower. Like have we?
Yeah,
but are we dealing with a new situation now?
It's a very new situation for Canadians. I mean, we have been followers for a long time now. Suddenly, we're the stronger performer for the most part, driven very much by the commodity economy, but many other things too. We didn't have the crash in our banking system that they sustained. We didn't have a subprime bubble in our housing sector. We're in a very different state. And that's going to really force all of us to learn how to live as a much more independent country when it comes to economic policy and economic performance. Also, we have to keep doing the right thing to build as much of a cushion as possible, because the Americans are going to go through a really tough patch where they're going to have to raise taxes, cut spending, do some really tough things to get their fiscal house in order. And that's really an exceptional period for Canadians.
So in this exceptional period, if we are going to have rates going higher in Canada, and we are going to be dealing with a par dollar for some time to come, is productivity a way for us to get out of this?
Well, it's kind of the silver bullet, the magic solution. We relied on a cheap dollar, frankly, for a long time to stay competitive. That's now gone. So the way to really square the circle is to boost productivity. Improved revenue per hour worked is the way I measure it. It's not about working harder, it's about working smarter, it's about having more innovation in every part of people's business practice to try and increase the revenues per hour that they put in. Because nobody wants to work more hours to generate the same revenue. It's all about putting our thinking caps on. I'm doing that in my own business. You're going to have to do it in yours, and all of your clients will have to do the same.
So as Canadians, are we good at productivity?
We're downright lousy at it. We've actually seen a big gap.
Why? What's going on?
Well, I think to a great extent we were able to use a soft currency as a kind of as the buffer. We haven't had to adapt to globalization because we relied on a weak dollar. That's now gone. We estimate $7,000 per capita poorer than Americans, because of their stronger productivity performance over about a 25-year period. So this is a really interesting big challenge for Canada. And most of our political leaders don't want to talk about it. They'll talk about innovation or competitiveness. But the real issue is revenue per hour worked and how we're going to boost that.
So is Canada up to that challenge? Canadians, as a Canadian, I wouldn't say that Canadians are lazy. Like, what do we do? How do we do this?
Let's use some metaphors in other areas. I mean, we understood 20 years ago that we weren't the #1 hockey nation in the world. We had summits, we rethought how we're going to position ourselves. We now think we're #1 in that one sport. So clearly, if we decide to get our act together and do something, we can do it. So are we up to the challenge? I think we'll have to find out. I have my doubts, frankly, because up to now, we haven't had to really change our behavior. This is about people looking inside how they operate and being open to new ideas every day. It's not about Big Bang. It's not about inventing more rims, for example, or having more Blackberries. It's about day-to-day adjustment, adaptation, how we do things to get better outcomes. And I do think we're capable of that. My fear is we're going to wait until the last hour. Well, almost a crisis, and then we'll adjust, which is kind of the Canadian way of doing things.
We'll strike a committee.
Well, we'll strike a committee. We'll talk about it a long time. I mean, I was at the Federal Department of Finance for 10 years, all the way through until 1994, and it only took the next budget when we finally addressed the fiscal deficit federally. Provinces did the same thing, but we're that far from our crisis before we acted, and that's my fear is we'll wait until the last hour, and then we'll get our act together and do something. So I do believe that fundamentally Canadians are quite capable of adapting and adjusting. I just don't know what the catalyst is going to be, what the trigger is going to be.
Finally, to wrap up, let's talk about agriculture really quick. When you think of agriculture right now in Canada and think about it economically, do you see a rosy picture ahead, or what do you see?
Well, I'm here speaking to the beef producers. I think they face some big challenges, but they're well aware of that, and that's the first step is recognition of the challenges. you know, if you're in beef, for example, they've got strong dollar, rising interest rates, rising feed prices right now. But we heard some things about the global marketplace being open to new ideas. So here's a chance for beef producers to step up. I think we can see the same sort of thing across the board. Now, we've done research at the Conference Board about supply management, and there is an area that I wish we could actually confront head on and have an honest discussion about why are some parts of our ag community open to international competition, international markets, and some parts totally protected. I think we have to have a little bit more honest dialogue about what the operating rules are across the board for ag. But I think fundamentally farmers and people in the agricultural industry are as capable of adjustment as anybody else. Just have to find the courage to, screw up our courage and do it.
Glenn, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you again soon.
It was a pleasure. We'll see you again.